Good evening, and welcome to Truth Report. I'm Alex Truth, and tonight we are tracking what may be the most consequential 48 hours in this widening Middle East conflict. Multiple fronts, multiple nations, and a civilian death toll that demands the world's attention.
I'm Maya Clarity, and we have a packed show tonight. From devastating Israeli strikes in Lebanon to U.S. bombers deploying to British soil, from Iran's internal crackdown to Turkey's diplomatic push, and even Hong Kong recalculating its economic future around this war. These stories are not isolated. They are chapters in the same unfolding crisis, and tonight we connect every single thread.
Let's start with the human cost, because that is what matters most. We begin in Lebanon, in the Bekaa Valley town of Nabi Chit, where Israeli forces have carried out a series of air and ground attacks that have killed at least 41 people. 41 lives, Maya. And those are the confirmed numbers. The actual toll could be higher as rescue teams continue to dig through rubble.
That's right, Alex. According to reporting from Middle East Eye, Israeli forces targeted the town of Nabi Chit with both aerial bombardment and ground operations. This is a town in the eastern Bekaa Valley, a region that has historically been a Hezbollah stronghold, but it is also home to thousands of ordinary Lebanese families. Schools, homes, marketplaces, all of it caught in the crossfire of what Israel calls its campaign against militant infrastructure.
And let's be absolutely clear about the scale of what we're seeing here. 41 dead in a single town in a single wave of attacks. That is not a precision operation. That is the kind of casualty figure you see when entire residential blocks are being hit. We've seen this pattern before in Gaza, where so-called targeted strikes produce mass civilian casualties, and now it is being replicated across the border in Lebanon.
The Lebanese health authorities have been struggling to keep up with the toll. Hospitals in the Bekaa Valley were already under strain before this latest escalation, and now they're receiving dozens of wounded alongside the dead. First responders describe scenes of utter devastation, with buildings collapsed and families trapped beneath concrete. This is the reality of modern aerial warfare directed at populated areas, regardless of what military objectives are cited.
And here's what I want our audience to understand. Nabi Chit is not some remote outpost. It's a town with a civilian population, with children, with elderly residents who have no connection to any armed group. International humanitarian law is unambiguous on this point. Attacks that cause disproportionate civilian harm are violations. Full stop. The question is whether anyone with the power to enforce those laws has the political will to do so.
And that question, Alex, leads us directly to the diplomatic front, because while bombs are falling on Lebanese towns, there are conversations happening at the highest levels of power that will determine whether this war escalates further or finds some path toward de-escalation. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan spoke by phone with British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, and the message from Ankara was pointed.
According to Middle East Eye's reporting, Erdogan told Starmer directly that more can be done for a diplomatic solution. Now, let's unpack that, because diplomatic language is designed to obscure as much as it reveals. When Erdogan says more can be done, he's essentially saying that the current international response is inadequate. He's saying that the Western powers, particularly the United States and the United Kingdom, have not used their leverage to bring this conflict to a halt.
And Erdogan is in a unique position to make that argument. Turkey has historically positioned itself as a bridge between East and West, between NATO and the Muslim world. Erdogan has been one of the most vocal critics of Israel's military operations, and he has repeatedly called for international intervention. But this phone call with Starmer signals something more specific. It signals that Turkey sees Britain as a potential pressure point, a NATO ally that might be persuaded to push harder for a ceasefire.
The timing of that call is significant too. Starmer's Labour government has been walking a tightrope on this conflict, facing enormous pressure from within its own party to take a harder line against Israeli military operations while trying to maintain the traditional Anglo-American alliance. Erdogan calling Starmer directly is a calculated move. He's offering Starmer political cover to be bolder on diplomacy while simultaneously putting him on notice that the world is watching.
And let's talk about what a diplomatic solution would actually look like at this point, because the conflict has expanded so far beyond its original scope that any ceasefire would need to address multiple theaters simultaneously. You'd need agreements covering Gaza, Lebanon, and now potentially Iran. The diplomatic architecture required is enormous, and right now, no single international body or coalition appears to be building it with any urgency.
Which brings us to what may be the most alarming military development of the week. 3 United States Air Force B-1 Lancer bombers have landed at Royal Air Force Fairford in Gloucestershire, England. Now, for our audience who may not be familiar with military hardware, the B-1 Lancer is not a defensive aircraft. It is a long-range strategic bomber capable of carrying massive conventional payloads. You don't deploy B-1s to send a diplomatic message. You deploy them to project force.
Middle East. I confirmed the arrival of these 3 bombers at RAF Fairford, which has a long history as a staging base for American military operations. This is the same airfield that was used during the Iraq War, during operations in Afghanistan, and during NATO's bombing campaign in Yugoslavia. When American bombers show up at Fairford, it historically means that the Pentagon is preparing for sustained strike operations, and the Middle East is the most logical theater for their deployment.
Let's talk about what the B-1 Lancer can do. Each aircraft can carry up to 75,000 pounds of ordnance. It has a combat range of over 3,000 miles, which means that from Gloucestershire, these bombers can reach any target in the Middle East, including Iran, without refueling. 3 B-1s represent an extraordinary amount of firepower, and their presence in Britain puts them within striking distance of every major flashpoint in the current conflict.
And this is where the story connects to the broader geopolitical picture. The deployment of strategic bombers to a forward operating base in Europe is not a routine training exercise. This is a signal, and it's a signal directed at multiple audiences. It tells Iran that the United States has the capability and the positioning to strike deep inside Iranian territory. It tells Russia and China that America is projecting force into a theater where their interests are also at stake. And it tells NATO allies that they may be called upon to support or at least facilitate American military operations.
The British government's role here cannot be overlooked. By allowing American bombers to stage from RAF Fairford, the UK is directly enabling potential military operations. This is happening at the same time that Erdogan is calling Starmer about diplomatic solutions. The contradiction is stark. On one hand, Britain is hosting conversations about peace. On the other, it's hosting the aircraft that could dramatically escalate the war.
And that contradiction is felt most acutely in Iran, where the government is now taking extraordinary internal security measures that suggest it is preparing for the worst. According to Al Jazeera, Iranian authorities are warning against what they call a 5th column, internal enemies who might undermine the country during wartime. The intelligence ministry has renewed its call for citizens to report any suspicious activity through phone calls and messaging services.
This is a significant development, Maya, and it tells us a lot about how Tehran views the current situation. When a government starts warning about internal enemies and encouraging citizens to surveil each other, it means that government feels genuinely threatened. Iran is essentially putting its population on a war footing, not just against external military threats, but against potential internal dissent that could fracture the country during a conflict.
Al Jazeera's reporting makes clear that there are no signs of the war abating, and Iran's leadership appears to have internalized that reality. The 5th column rhetoric is drawn directly from wartime playbooks. It's language designed to unify a population by identifying an internal threat, and it's language that governments use when they believe conflict is imminent or already underway. The fact that Iran's intelligence ministry is activating these surveillance networks suggests that Tehran is expecting escalation, not de-escalation.
And let's be honest about what 5th column warnings mean in practice. In Iran, this kind of rhetoric has historically been used to justify crackdowns on dissidents, journalists, activists, and ethnic minorities. The 2022 protest movement showed the world that millions of Iranians are deeply unhappy with their government. By invoking the specter of internal enemies during a time of external threat, the Iranian authorities are creating a pretext to suppress any domestic opposition under the banner of national security.
It's a pattern we see in conflict zones around the world. Governments facing external pressure use that pressure to consolidate internal control. The war becomes a justification for silencing critics, and anyone who questions the government's handling of the crisis can be labeled a traitor or a foreign agent. Iranian civil society, which has shown remarkable courage in recent years, now faces the double threat of external bombardment and internal repression.
And this brings us to the economic dimensions of this conflict, because wars are not just fought with bombs and bullets. They're fought with trade routes, financial markets, and economic leverage. Hong Kong's Financial Secretary Paul Chan-Imopa made a remarkable statement this week, one that reveals how this Middle East war is reshaping economic calculations on the other side of the world.
According to the South China Morning Post, Chan said that Hong Kong's economic growth forecast of between 2.5 and 3.5% for the year will not be affected by the Middle East war. But the details of his statement are far more revealing than the headline. He acknowledged that the war will hurt Hong Kong's trading sector, which is significant given that trade is the backbone of the Hong Kong economy. But here's the twist. He said the war would actually benefit Hong Kong's financial markets.
Let's sit with that for a moment. The financial secretary of Hong Kong is essentially saying that while the war is bad for the movement of physical goods, it's good for financial speculation. War creates volatility, and volatility creates profit for financial centers. When shipping routes are disrupted, when oil prices spike, when currencies fluctuate, the institutions that trade on those movements make enormous amounts of money. Hong Kong, as one of Asia's premier financial hubs, is positioned to profit from the chaos.
And Chan's comments about Sino-US relations add another layer to this. He said Hong Kong would remain vigilant over the impacts of US-China tensions while consolidating its traditional American and European markets and developing new ones in Asia. Read between the lines, and you see a city that is hedging its bets. Hong Kong is trying to maintain its role as a bridge between Western and Chinese capital while simultaneously preparing for a world where that bridge may not hold.
The geopolitical implications are enormous. If the Middle East war continues to disrupt global trade routes, particularly through the Red Sea and the Strait of Hormuz, the entire architecture of global commerce shifts. Asian financial centers like Hong Kong, Singapore, and Shanghai become even more important as trading hubs, while the traditional Western-dominated financial infrastructure faces new challenges. Chan is essentially positioning Hong Kong to be a winner in a war-disrupted global economy.
And that raises profound moral questions. When a financial center's leadership publicly acknowledges that war is good for business, we should all pause and ask who this global economic system truly serves. The same conflict that is killing 41 people in a Lebanese town is generating profits for traders in Hong Kong. The same bombs falling on Nabi Chit are creating the market volatility that financial institutions profit from. That is the architecture of modern warfare, a system where destruction in one place creates wealth in another.
It's worth noting that Chan also emphasized developing new markets in Asia, which signals Hong Kong's broader pivot away from dependence on Western economies. This is consistent with China's larger strategy of building economic networks that are less vulnerable to American sanctions and trade restrictions. The Middle East war is accelerating this realignment, pushing Asian economies to build alternative trade routes and financial infrastructure that bypass Western-controlled choke points.
And this is where all 5 of our stories tonight converge into a single, undeniable pattern. We are watching a conflict that is redrawing the map of global power. Israeli strikes in Lebanon are expanding the geographic scope of the war. Turkey's diplomatic push reveals the inadequacy of existing international institutions. Iran's internal crackdown shows a nation preparing for prolonged conflict. American bombers in Britain signal that the world's most powerful military is positioning for further escalation. And Hong Kong's economic calculations show how financial systems are already adapting to a war economy.
Let's connect these dots explicitly, because the connections are not coincidental. The B-1 bombers at RAF Fairford are positioned to strike the same Iran that is warning its citizens about fifth columnists. Turkey's call for diplomacy comes as Israeli bombs kill dozens in Lebanon, the very attacks that diplomacy would need to address. And Hong Kong's financial calculations are built on the assumption that none of this will be resolved quickly. Every actor in this drama is operating as though the war will continue and escalate.
And the civilians caught in the middle, the 41 dead in Nabi Chit, the Iranian dissidents facing new rounds of repression, the families across the Middle East living under the shadow of strategic bombers, they are the ones paying the price for these geopolitical calculations. When Paul Chan says the war benefits Hong Kong's financial markets, he's talking about real human suffering being converted into real financial gain. That is not an abstraction. That is the fundamental moral equation of this conflict.
The question we should all be asking is this. Who has the power to stop this, and why aren't they using it? The United States has enormous leverage over Israel as its primary military supplier. The UN Security Council has the mandate to authorize ceasefires. NATO allies like Britain could refuse to host the bombers that make escalation possible. Turkey has diplomatic channels to multiple parties. But each of these actors has calculated that their interests are better served by the continuation of conflict than by its resolution.
And that calculation is the real scandal here. It's not just that wars happen. It's that the international system we've built, the institutions we've created to prevent and resolve conflicts, are failing by design. The Security Council is paralyzed by vetoes. NATO is enabling military escalation while its members talk about peace. Financial markets are rewarding war with profits. The system isn't broken. It's working exactly as the most powerful actors want it to work.
Erdogan's phone call to Starmer captures this perfectly. When the president of Turkey has to personally call the Prime Minister of Britain to say that more can be done, it reveals just how little is being done through normal diplomatic channels. These are leaders who sit together at NATO summits, who have ambassadors in each other's capitals, who have access to every international institution ever created. And yet a phone call is the best they can manage while the bombs continue to fall.
And let's talk about the media's role in all of this, because how these stories are covered matters. Each of these 5 stories is being reported in isolation by different outlets in different regions. The South China Morning Post covers the Hong Kong economic angle. Middle East Eye tracks the military developments. Al Jazeera reports on Iran's internal politics. But who is connecting them? Who is showing the audience that these are not separate events but interconnected elements of a single, escalating crisis?
That's exactly what we're trying to do here at Truth Report. Because when you see these stories in isolation, they feel manageable. An economic forecast here, a diplomatic phone call there, a military deployment somewhere else. But when you lay them side by side, the picture that emerges is deeply alarming. We are watching a war that is drawing in more nations, killing more civilians, reshaping global economics, and eroding the international institutions that are supposed to prevent exactly this kind of catastrophe.
The deployment of B-1 bombers to British soil deserves particular scrutiny because of what it represents about the trajectory of this conflict. These are not fighter jets for air defense. These are not reconnaissance aircraft for intelligence gathering. These are strategic bombers designed to deliver massive payloads of ordnance over long distances. Their deployment is a statement of intent, and the intent is the capacity for a significant escalation of military operations in the Middle East.
And the British public should be asking hard questions about what their government has agreed to. RAF Fairford is on British soil. Those bombers are fueling, arming, and launching from British territory. If those aircraft are used to strike targets in Iran or elsewhere, Britain is not a bystander. It is a participant. The legal, moral, and strategic implications of hosting those bombers are enormous, and yet there has been no parliamentary debate, no public consultation, no meaningful scrutiny of this decision.
This pattern of executive action without democratic oversight is one of the most corrosive effects of modern warfare. Decisions that could draw an entire nation into a wider conflict are made behind closed doors, announced as fait accompli, and justified with vague references to alliance obligations and national security. The British people deserve to know why their country is being used as a staging ground for potential strikes, and they deserve a voice in that decision.
Meanwhile, Iran's intelligence ministry warnings about a fifth column represent the other side of this same coin. Just as Western governments are making military decisions without democratic input, Iran's government is using the threat of war to justify surveillance and repression of its own people. The external conflict becomes a tool of internal control, and the losers are ordinary citizens on both sides who are denied both safety from bombs and freedom from their own governments.
And this is the deeper pattern that connects all 5 stories tonight. In Hong Kong, economic elites are positioning to profit from war. In London, military decisions are made without public debate. In Ankara, diplomatic efforts are overshadowed by military preparations. In Tehran, war is being used to justify repression. And in Nabi Chit, Lebanon, 41 people are dead. At every level, from the financial to the military to the political, the systems that are supposed to protect ordinary people are instead serving the interests of those in power.
The Financial Secretary of Hong Kong tells us the war is good for financial markets. The Pentagon tells us the bombers are for deterrence. The Israeli military tells us the strikes are targeted. The Iranian intelligence ministry tells us the surveillance is for national security. And Turkey tells us diplomacy is the answer. But the results speak louder than the rhetoric. More dead. More displaced. More profit for those who trade on suffering. More power for those who govern through fear.
As we close tonight, I want to return to Nabi Chit, because the numbers can become abstractions if we let them. 41 people. Each of them had a name, a family, a daily routine, a future they were planning for. Some of them were children. Some were elderly. Some were simply in the wrong place, which happened to be their own home, in their own town, in their own country. They did not choose to be part of anyone's strategic calculation.
And that is why journalism matters in moments like this. Not the kind of journalism that simply relays official statements and moves on. But the kind that asks why. Why are bombers being deployed? Why are financial centers profiting? Why are intelligence services activating surveillance networks? Why are diplomatic efforts failing? And most importantly, why are 41 people dead in a town that most of the world had never heard of before today?
These are the questions that Truth Report exists to ask. We don't accept the official narrative. We don't treat civilian deaths as collateral damage. We don't pretend that economic forecasts are separate from the wars that drive them. We connect the dots, because the powerful count on the rest of us seeing these stories in isolation, never recognizing the system that links them all together.
So here's what we're asking you tonight. Pay attention. Share what you've learned. Demand answers from your representatives. The people making these decisions, the generals, the finance ministers, the intelligence chiefs, they are counting on your indifference. They are counting on you being too overwhelmed, too distracted, or too resigned to hold them accountable. Don't give them that satisfaction.
41 people in Nabi Chit cannot speak for themselves anymore. But we can speak for them, and so can you. Stay informed, stay critical, and never accept that this is just the way things are. Because it doesn't have to be.
For Truth Report, I'm Alex Truth.
And I'm Maya Clarity. Stay vigilant. The truth doesn't report itself.